Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Indigo Today. My name is Mr. Ivan. Today, we are joined by a very special guest. Her name is Miss Ophir Bar. She's a friend of mine. We met when I was living in Colorado, and later on, we were working together as well in Los Angeles. The reason Ophir is here today is to talk to us about the Holocaust and the Auschwitz complex of concentration camps, because that is something that we will be looking at in our classes this week. And so we just wanted to give our viewers this more personal connection to the Jewish community. So, Ophir, thank you very much for coming. It's really good to see you.
Hi everyone.
Hello. Would you like to give us a little bit of an introduction to yourself?
So I'm Ophir. I'm originally from Israel, and I currently live in Los Angeles, and I'm a content creator. I work in television, and yes, I'm Jewish, and I'm what's called an Ashkenazi Jew. So Ashkenazi Jews, have European heritage, and so my grandparents lived in Europe, specifically in Belgium and France and Poland. And so during the World War II, they were affected by the Holocaust, and actually my great grandparents died in the Holocaust. And so I'm a third generation of survivors to the Holocaust. That's very important to bring the stories, because it was not that long ago when you think about it. And it's my grandfather, and it's really not, he was 16, so he really understood what was going on. He wasn't a small child or anything like that. And so even it was hard for him to speak about it, because back then it wasn't very popular to speak about these things because it was too early.
Issues, because it's like,
and he died in the 90s. And so he spoke very little about it because it was so traumatizing to him. But it's, yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely understandable. But so just for the benefit of our viewers who might not know very much about Auschwitz or the Holocaust and the history behind it, would you mind just giving us a quick background on what the Holocaust was and who perpetrated it and what the kind of twisted reasons were behind it?
So it's a very large subject, but essentially what was happening back then in Europe is it was something that was going on for many years. Anti-Semitism and the Jewish community in Europe were not really taken as, we weren't, the Jewish community wasn't a part of all of European countries, and we weren't viewed the same as white Europeans. We were viewed as a different race. And what Hitler did, was taking all that, because it's been a while. Jewish people were bankers and were all typically very successful in what they did, and I think that rose also a lot of hate towards them. And it was easy to hate the Jews. So they pretty much, through caricatures and propaganda and things like that, it escalated. And in Germany, until, Hitler and the Third Reich rose to power, and they passed the Nuremberg, the race laws. And, so there were the Aryans, which were the white, and the white people, the white European people, and the Jews, they were a subhumane race. Like, they weren't even, human to them. And Hitler decided to just get rid of all the Jews, basically. And so he started invading countries in Europe, and in all those countries, they sent the Jews to concentration camps and then death camps as well, into gas chambers. And their goal was to get rid of the entirety population of Jews, not only in Europe, but all over the world, because there's Jews all over the world. And so that's basically what was happening.
Right. And also the Holocaust, like as I mean, like it was the probably the single greatest extermination of Jewish people at the time, but it wasn't the only one. There were other genocides.
Yeah, so there's of course that it's the Holocaust was the biggest and most efficient one, but and also also during the Holocaust, Hitler was already working on getting Jews from North Africa and other places, and actually some of them he already got to go to concentration camps and even get killed, but he didn't manage to fully do that because the war was over before. But there were throughout history pogroms all over in Russia. There was a lot of anti-Semitism in North Africa, in Asia. There's a lot of Asian countries that has the Jewish population there, and they're almost non-existent anymore because in many cases non-existent. Like in Iraq, there were, I think it was 150,000 in Iraq in 1940, and now there's only 3 Jewish people in Iraq. So
Wow.
that's completely erasing, a group of people.
So the attempted erasure and genocide of the Jewish people has not just been isolated to the Holocaust.
Yeah.
Yeah. But and also, like thank goodness Hitler wasn't able to complete his goal of exterminating the Jews. He got really far. And
6 million people is a lot.
Yeah.
Out of them, 1 million children.
6 million is larger than the entire population of Singapore. So to imagine that amount of people, it's hard to even think about these numbers because sometimes the numbers are too big to even conceptualize. But imagine like a whole country's worth of people, being systematically exterminated like this, and it's horrible. It's one of the probably the most horrible thing that humans have ever been able to do to each other in throughout history.
Yeah. Still to this day, when I think of like even cows, it was like the Jews back then were treated like cattle. Not even, it was they were going to on trains with no water, no food, to go to a death camp where they'd be put in a line. Either you live or you go to work. You live and go to work, or you die. And basically all the strong 16-year-olds went to work and all the other ones went to die. And that's where my grandfather was lucky, to be in the line of the living. But, like my grandfather would say that we are like his family is the victory, because Hitler wasn't able to complete his job. And, we're his victory because now he has grandchildren and children and, great grandchildren. And so it's a big deal.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely. It's definitely a triumph to exist, right? In spite of that kind of hatred that was thrown upon your people. So your grandfather, was he with his parents in Auschwitz?
So what happened to my grandfather and his family was that they lived in Brussels in Belgium, and he was 16 and his 2 sisters were much younger, and he had 2 younger sisters, and basically they took them out of the house, and they told everybody to wear a star that was a yellow star that told everybody that you were Jewish. And it escalated slowly. At first you were supposed to wear this star and still you could live at your house, but you couldn't go into specific stores so they had like signs and everything that you weren't allowed if you were Jewish and all sorts of things like that. And slowly but surely they started taking things from them, like the banks, and started taking things from the Jewish community. until they were left with nothing, and they were actually marching on the street to go to a concentration camp in France. And so they took the family, and actually they took them to France, to a concentration camp. And in France, my grandfather was able to smuggle his two younger sisters, with a friend, I think, to a church. And so they were, hiding as Catholics, and with the church, and they were kids. So basically, they took them to Switzerland, which was neutral, and nothing was really happening in Switzerland back in World War II, unlike the rest of Europe. And then they immigrated to the United States, and they got an asylum in the U.S. And so they are American citizens to this day. And and my grandfather and his two parents, we don't know exactly, because my grandfather was so emotional about it. But my grandfather, my great grandfather, he was shot by a Nazi soldier on the street in front of them. And so, my grandpa saw his father die, and his mom. So what happened was, after a while in that concentration camp in France, they sent them to Poland, where all the death camps were, and most of the concentration camps as well. Like most of the work that they did was there. And so they sent my grandma, and my grandpa wasn't supposed to go because he was a strong young boy, and he could do things, But my great grandmother was sent to Auschwitz, and he jumped on the train to go with her when he saw that she, went there. And he ended up not finding her because it was a mess. It was literally like even worse than cattle. At least, you kind of like know who's going where when, they put cattle on trains to take them to, I don't know, to the slaughterhouse. But with them, they just, we're all in different places, and they couldn't find each other. And we know now, because of, we have all the names and everything, that my great grandmother died in the gas chambers when she was brought to Auschwitz. So, as I said, when they brought them to Auschwitz, they put them in two lines. Well, they gave them numbers, like tattoo numbers, like cattle. And my grandfather had that tattoo till the day he died. And they had no names anymore, so they erased their identity, and they gave them a number. And from then on, they were that number. And then the two lines happened, and they sent mostly the women and children and the weak people, old people, to the gas chambers immediately. And the strong ones that could work, they could let them work there. And so that's what happened. My grandfather, every day he would go through that line, because they were malnourished. They didn't have food. They didn't have anything. So basically, you could be strong one day, but in like a month, you're cold. There's a lot of illnesses in those death camps. The bodies gave a lot of diseases there were dead bodies everywhere. And I'm sorry for how I'm telling it, but that's what happened. So my grandfather ended up one day being sent to die to the line, and he knew that this wasn't the right line to be in, and so he actually smuggled to the other line. He managed to, when you think about it, this is why I'm here today. It's only because if that wouldn't happen, my grandfather wouldn't have been able to survive. And also, after a while, they asked if there was an engineer, and my grandfather, who wasn't an engineer, just decided it was a smart idea to just raise his hand and say he had a qualification and that sort of thing. And so they took him to a different concentration camp, and they got liberated eventually by the Americans. And he was, I think, 30 kilos when they liberated the camp, because they didn't give them food or anything. And my grandfather would tell that because he looked Aryan, so he was blonde and blue eyes, and Jews typically are not. So he actually, one of the soldiers, the Nazi soldiers, smuggled him food in the bathroom, like a piece of bread, every once in a while. He liked him. So yeah, that's my grandpa's story. He ended up going back to Belgium, and to find that all his, that what used to be his home is no longer a home, and there was still hate towards Jews. It wasn't, and Jews were still afraid. And so then, they finally gave independence to Israel, and he was able to move to Israel, which was an asylum to all the Jewish people around the world who suffer, and to this day suffer, from anti-Semitism. And it's so important because it is, to some people, it is a life or death, reality. So it's very important to us, and that is the reason.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that story. That's really, really terrible to hear. I mean, it's important to hear this stories like this, but it's never easy to tell them or to hear them, to just think about like the atrocities people would commit.
Yeah, my grandpa was a strong man. He was, a soccer player. He played in Anderlecht, which is a famous team in Belgium. Mm-hmm. And he was such a strong man. And to think, that every time you would ask him about the Holocaust, he would shut down. He would start crying like a baby. He would not speak about it. And I think it's a common thing with survivors until, until they got much older, then they found out that it was, time to talk, because it's important for these stories to be heard.
Thank you very much for sharing your thoughts and your insights. I think this has been very valuable to myself and to our students and to our viewers. It's really great to have you here.
Thank you, Ivan, and it's very important. And thank you for everybody who is listening. It might be some groups of people may be far away from you geographically, or you don't know them specifically, personally, but at the end of the day, we're all people. So mm-hmm. I think it's a nice way that today we can kind of like meet in different ways.
All right, awesome. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. See you soon.
All right. Talk to you again soon.
Yeah, bye-bye.
Bye.